When I first learned about the EL zone system, I was excited about its potential applications. However, I quickly realized it wasn't available for any of the equipment I was using. Today, I want to show you how I build a LUT that you can load onto your camera or external monitor that mimics how the system works. The EL zone system is a recently developed exposure measurement tool that might resemble false color at first glance, but it works very differently. Unlike false color, which measured IRE, the EL zone system measures stops. Understanding stops and learning to communicate in terms of stops will make you a better cinematographer. Traditionally, the only way to measure stop was by using a light meter. The main advantage of the EL zone system is that it displays the stops for the entire image, making it quick and easy to assess exposure levels. Now, before we dive into creating the LUT, let's talk about stops. Stops measure the amount of light hitting an object. One stop equals doubling or cutting in half the amount of light, and it uses middle gray as the reference. Middle gray is a specific, standardized tone used by all camera manufacturers to measure dynamic range. Lenses also use stops to measure aperture. Opening the aperture by one stops double the light hitting the sensor, while closing it by one stop reduce the amount of light by half. ISO also works the same way. Doubling the ISO equals one stop. Understanding stops provide a consistent way to communicate exposure on set. For example, on a recent project, I was able to tell my gaffer to set the fill side of the actor's face to 2 stops below the key light. Using a light meter, he achieved the exact contrast ratio I wanted, ensuring consistency between shots. False color is a very useful tool, but it doesn't always help maintain consistent contrast when changing scene. So for instance, if you expose your subject 1 stop over middle gray and the background 3 stops below middle gray, you can replicate that contrast in any environment by working in stops. The EL zone system measures up to 6 stops above and below middle gray. It also has a half stop above and a half stop below. Now, I also want to be very clear here that the LUT that I'm about to show you is not as accurate as the real EL zone system. It has limitation depending on the tool used to create it. For example, I use a false color plugin to simplify the process, but it limits the number of segments available, so I can only measure 6 stops above and 4 stops below middle gray. Well, I discovered a more complex method in DaVinci Resolve to create all 16 segments. It's time-consuming and less user-friendly, and I'll show you that later. Additionally, the LUT does not display a chart on your monitor, so I often have to refer to the saved image of the chart on my cell phone. Ideally, I would prefer using the actual EL zone system, which is available on some small HD and some Atomos monitors. I hope it will eventually be added as a firmware upgrade to my Atomos monitor and my Sony camera. The LUT I created doesn't actually measure stops, but rather the IRE value for each stop. And that's a big difference in accuracy, but most importantly, the IRE value varies for each format and sensor, which means you need a different LUT based on the format you use and for better accuracy for each camera you use. Now, depending on your workflow, creating a LUT for Rec. 709 might be a better option. In my case, I typically send a Rec. 709 signal to my monitor, so creating a Rec. 709 LUT for my monitor is a great option. The process remains the same, only the IRE value will change based on your camera and the format you want to use. The good thing is it's fairly simple to create, and it's also a great way to learn how to use stops. Now, let's get started. The idea here is to create a false color LUT with IRE values matching the stops of your camera. In this example, I'll create a LUT for S-Log3, the format that I use. You can either use published IRE values or measure them yourself. In my case, I did both. I was able to find the IRE values for stops for S-Log3, and when measuring my own camera, found that the values to be pretty close to the published values. Using the internet values made the process very easy, but manually measuring each stop of my camera was a great exercise to help me understand stops and how my camera works. I'll go through the manual process, and if you decide to use the published value, just skip ahead to build your LUT. Here's what you'll need to measure the IRE value for your camera. A camera, a middle gray card, a waveform monitor, a light, the EL zone system chart. We need to start with middle gray. The IRE value to expose middle gray for every format is typically published by the manufacturer, so you should be able to easily find it online. For S-Log3, middle gray should be exposed at 41 IRE. Now that we know the middle gray value, let's start measuring the 6 stops above middle gray. Looking at our lens, we need to identify at least 6 stops below fully open. So if your lens is an f2.8, for example, we would close the aperture by 6 stops. So from 2.8, 1 stop would be 4, 2 stop would be 5, 6, 3 would be 8, 4 would be 11, 5 would be 16, and 6 stop would be f22. If you're not sure how to identify stops, I found this great chart that not only display all the full stops, but also the half and 1/3 stops. You can find the link in the description. It will come handy when we need to measure the half stops. With our aperture set to f22, or 6 stop below fully open, we now need to expose the middle gray at 41 IRE. For the most accurate reading, let's turn off all the lights and place our light directly above our camera straight in front of the middle gray card. Using a waveform will be the most accurate way to measure the IRE value, but you can also use false color or even zebras to make sure you expose middle gray to 41 IRE. So by looking at the waveform, increase the light intensity until the waveform reaches 41 IRE. Now that middle gray is exposed, we will change our aperture setting without changing any other settings or the light to record the IRE value. I found it to be easier to simply push the record button and change my aperture and use the scopes in DaVinci or Premiere Pro to identify the IRE value. So let's start recording. I also use the camera microphone to simply record my voice and identify each stop. The first measure on the EL zone system is half a stop above. Looking at the stop chart, half a stop above f22 is f19. While recording, open the aperture to f19 and let it roll for a few seconds, just so that we have enough time to take a look at our waveform in post-production. Next is 1 stop above middle gray, so f16. 2 stops is f11, 3 stops is f8, and I'll repeat that process until I reach 6 stop above, or f2.8. We now need to do the same for the 6 stops below middle gray. With my aperture set to 2.8, I will now expose middle gray by adjusting the light until I reach 41 IRE at f2.8. We can now do the same in reverse, starting with a half stop below, or f3.3. 1 stop is f4, 2 stops is 5.6, all the way down to f22. We can now bring our footage into Premiere or DaVinci to identify all the values. By looking at the waveform monitor, we can easily identify all the IRE values for each stop. Now that we have our IRE values, we can build our LUT. There are many different ways that you can build a false color LUT, and depending on how accurate you want your LUT and the tools you have available, here are a few different options. I found and purchased a false color plugin by Time in Pixels that is available for both Premiere and DaVinci that allows you to customize up to 14 segments and has the capability to export a LUT. You can find the link in the description. It is the easiest way to create this LUT, but we will need to sacrifice how many stops the LUT will be able to measure, especially because the first segment is locked into 100 IRE and the 14th segment is locked into 0 IRE. One way to create all the segments in DaVinci is to use 16 different parallel nodes. Each node will use the qualifier to separate the luminance of each stop, and the RGB mixer will be used to overlay the corresponding color. It's a little complex and frustrating, but you can achieve good results. I also watched a video of someone using DCTL to code the entire process. For my purpose, I will use the false color plugin in Premiere. The plugin has a series of presets already created for different monitors or cameras. I will select one with all 14 segments and save it as a different name, so let's call it EL LUT. Now we can assign each segment the IRE value we recorded earlier and a color that we want. I actually downloaded the EL Zone system chart and brought it into Photoshop to identify each color. Once I've finished building my custom false color, I can simply export it as a LUT, and it is now ready to be loaded on my monitor or my camera. I know this method is not perfect, but it really gave me a valuable alternative to replacing my perfectly good equipment with new ones just to add the EL Zone system. Atomos is re-releasing the Shogun 7, which is what I use, and I hope that the EL Zone system will be included in the new software. Hopefully, they'll make it available as a firmware upgrade like they did for the Ninja. I hope this was helpful in not only building a LUT that you can use to measure stops, but also to get you more familiar with using stops as a way to communicating with your camera and with others on set. Thank you for watching this video until the end. And as a token of my appreciation, I'd like to offer you my free camera setting cheat sheet. Just follow the link below to download your free cheat sheet. Thanks again, and happy filming.